Today I am bringing you a book review for Deadhouse Gates by Steven Erikson, which is the second book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. This book is really heavy, so I'm not going to hold it up for the entire video, but this is going to be more like a spoilery discussion rather than a review. I am going to be going into full spoilers, so if you haven't read this book or the previous book and you don't want spoilers, then this might not be the video for you. I will have my Gardens of the Moon video linked in the description, just in case you would like to check that out. Instead, that video is spoiler free, so it might be a good place to start if you are new to the world of Malazan. I mean, I'm not an expert, I've only read the first two books, but you might find that video more helpful if you're thinking about starting this series. But yeah, I am very excited to be talking about Deadhouse Gates, because if you watched that first video that I did, you'll know that when I finished Gardens of the Moon, I was a little on the fence about whether to continue this series. I thought there was potential for me to really love the world, which is the main thing that I look for in fantasy. I really love an immersive and interesting fantasy world, especially when it feels unique or there's something different about it. So I saw a lot of potential for me to like this series. However, Steven Erikson's writing, or more specifically the way that he crafts a story, I wasn't sure whether that was going to be for me. However, I did continue, and I'm happy to say that Deadhouse Gates was a strong 4 stars for me. So it was a step up from Gardens of the Moon, which I gave a 3 to a 3.5. If I do pronounce Malazan wrong at any point during this video, then please know that it annoys me as much as it's probably annoying you. At this point, I have heard so many different ways to pronounce Malazan that my brain just gets confused. So even if you were to tell me the correct way to say it, my brain would just be like, nope, we're not doing that. I think in my first Malazan video, I pronounced it like 3 or 4 different ways, so I do apologise for that if it is annoying. This is my partner's favourite series of all time, and he pronounces it Malazan, but I've heard a lot of booktubers pronounced it Malazan. I did also buddy read Deadhouse Gates with my partner because that's what we did with the first book, and it's really interesting reading this, first of all just with someone else in general, but especially rereading it with someone who has read this series and who loves it. It means that when I'm confused about stuff and I want to discuss stuff, then I can just talk to him about it and say, this is what I think is happening, am I right? I think actually the best place to start is with something that's maybe slightly more negative. It's gonna sound more negative than I feel like it is because I think this issue that I have might not become a problem as I get further into the series. The way that Steven Erikson crafts a story, how he drops you right into things and doesn't give you a lot of explanation and you have to read into context clues. Characters don't waste time explaining stuff to each other that they already know. I think that feels like a really organic way to build a world and a magic system, and also the plot as well. I don't mind not knowing what the plot of a book is. It's not the most important thing to me about a story. I can just work things out as I go. So the way that he crafts his stories works for me in terms of the world, the magic and the plot. However, I don't think it quite works for me in terms of the characters, and in between reading book 1 and book 2, I consumed a lot of Malazan content. Obviously spoiler free, but I watched a lot of videos about the first book. I read a lot of reviews on Reddit and on Goodreads, and there was something that I saw someone say, and I can't remember who it was or where I saw this. Someone was talking about how they feel about the characters, at least after reading the first book, and I think I feel a similar way. So the way that I feel about these characters, I feel like I should know them better than I do. Like the way that they're written, it feels like we're 3 or 4 books into a series and I've already spent loads of time with them, so I should therefore know stuff about their personalities and their motivations, but I don't. This is a multi-POV series, and so you're jumping around the characters quite a lot, and so I don't feel like I really know these characters as well as the book expects me to know them. As I said, I think that might change as I get further into the series and as I spend more time with these characters, but there were some emotional moments in Deadhouse Gates in particular that didn't really hit me as hard as I think they could have. I felt like I was watching characters experience these emotions, and objectively it was really well written. There were some really powerful passages, especially towards the end of the book. However, for me, I just felt like there was this barrier. I felt really distanced from the characters. Not as much as in Gardens of the Moon though, I will say. I think because there were fewer character perspectives in this book. I don't actually know whether there were fewer character POVs. However, I felt like there were because we were spending just a little more time with these characters, and there were distinctive groups that you were following. And then when these groups started to converge, I found it again a lot easier to feel like I was in the flow of the story. It was really interesting to me how the plot of this centres around a rebellion that's rising in Seven Cities, especially because we heard quite a lot about Seven Cities in the first book. I felt like Seven Cities was a much more immersive and vivid place in comparison to Genebakis. Genebakis to me felt like a very generic fantasy world, whereas Seven Cities, it felt like there was just so much history there, and there was a really beautiful part where the place of Seven Cities was being described and how it's basically layers upon layers of these different civilizations, and it's a very hot and desert climate, and I just felt like it was so much more vivid in comparison to Genebakis. It's also really interesting to me how a lot of the characters that we're following are either Malazan or they are part of the Malazan army, and I feel like we are meant to root for these characters, or at least most of these characters. However, we're not necessarily meant to be rooting for the Empire or for the Empress in particular. That to me is so interesting that we're following these characters who, even if we don't necessarily like them, I think they are fascinating characters to follow because they do have links to this empire, which I'm just getting the feeling we're not meant to like this empire, or maybe we are just not meant to like the Empress. My favourite perspective to follow initially was Felison, maybe because we've already met her brother in the first book, but also I felt like we weren't meant to like her. I thought she was being written in a way where she was very abrasive and she was just not very nice to the people around her. However, this is a young girl who has been through a lot of trauma. If you give me a character who is only 15 or 16 and she has been forced to grow up faster than she should have, I'm going to do my best to understand them rather than just dismiss them as a horrible person. I also really loved following Fiddler and Kalam, especially Fiddler because he's a character that we were introduced to in the first book. However, I could barely even remember his name. He was just kind of there in the background, and so getting to know him a little better in the second book I really appreciated. Kalam, I did struggle to get my head around his motivations initially because he's from Seven Cities, so it would make sense that he would be on the side of this rebellion. Even though he joined the Malazan army, the bridge burners have obviously now been outlawed. I couldn't understand why he took the book to Shaikh. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I couldn't understand why he helped to start this rebellion, but then he didn't seem to want to actively join in the rebellion. He was still kind of on this mission. Although now that I'm talking about it, maybe it does make sense and we're meant to question where his loyalties lie. Maybe he's torn, maybe he has mixed loyalties, or maybe his loyalties lie with the bridge burners. I wasn't the biggest fan of Mappo and Ikariam until they joined up with Fiddler. Mappo's perspective, I think, was the most confusing because there was a lot that was clearly going on, and once I started to grasp actually what was happening with him and Ikariam, then we started getting all of these reveals and I've actually made a list of all of the reveals that we got in this book because some of these just blew my mind. Shadow Throne is actually Kellenvad, the old emperor, which I didn't see come in. However, I think it was foreshadowed. We were told that the Shadow Realm didn't actually become a thing until after Kellenvad and Dancer died. Or maybe I should say died, because as we have learned, resurrection is very much a possibility within the world of Malazan. The reveal that Servant is actually Aspelar's father, again, did not see that come in, even though it was hinted at earlier in the book. It's so clever the way that Stephen Erikson leaves these little clues, and there's these moments where you think, okay, I don't know whether this is going to be important later, but it feels like a really random thing. Like earlier in the book, Mappo and Ikariam come across this ship or this boat. For that to then end up being such a big reveal, I thought was really clever. Also, when Aspelar goes out into the desert after her father and Fiddler believes that she's going to become Shaikh Reborn, how that was really a bait and switch, and it's Felison who's taken on that role. That again was so clever. I really enjoyed a lot of the reveals in this. I thought so many of them were really interesting but also really satisfying. We learned a little more about the Azath houses and what they mean, which I really appreciated because one of my main issues with the ending ending of Gardeners of the Moon is how we had this Azath house appear out of nowhere and it saved the day, and I was thinking, I don't understand what this is, I don't understand what it means. It feels really convenient, even though I knew when I took a step back I had a feeling that Stephen Erikson was going to explain in later books what that meant, and so maybe on reread it's not going to seem convenient now. But in the moment, at the end of book 1, I was so annoyed. I had no idea what this magic was, and so it did feel convenient in the moment. There were some brutal scenes towards the end of this book. Stephen Erikson clearly has no issue with killing off characters, and I don't feel like any of these characters have plot armor. Any of them could die at any moment. We saw that with Duca and Coltane. That scene, in fact, there were 2 moments towards the end where I really felt the intensity when Duca is having to watch Coltane and his soldiers in their last stand that they know is completely hopeless. They know it's not going to have a good outcome. The emotions that Duca was experiencing watching this happen, I could really feel that, and it does link into what I was saying earlier, where I felt like I was watching someone experience deep emotions without experiencing it myself. And this is why I don't want that to seem like a negative, because I could still feel the intensity in that moment, and then for Duca to die in such a horrific way a few chapters later, those parts did feel really powerful, and especially because this is a long book and it was such a significant part of the book following Coltane and Duca and this group of refugees and soldiers, this massive group of people moving across 7 cities. For that to be the resolution, it did feel very bleak. It does seem like it's not quite the end for those characters, and maybe we'll see them again in a different form. We already knew that that was something that could happen in the Malazan world because we saw that with Tattersail in book 1, and I'm really curious to see how Stephen Erikson approaches resurrection in this series. We saw it a little bit in Deadhouse Gates, and I am someone who usually I don't like the resurrection trope. However, when it's actually part of the world building and you know that it's part of the magic, I think it can be done in a really clever and satisfying way. I love that we got little hints as well at what's going on back in Genebakis. I'm assuming that in the 3rd book we're going to be back in that continent or on that continent. Not sure on the right grammar there, but I'm assuming that we're going to go back to Genebakis and we're going to resolve some of what was started in the 1st book. There was that reveal in Kalam's perspective where he was talking to Empress Lysine, and she said that she has this master plan involving Dujek and how the only reason he's been outlawed is so that he can ally with Anamanda Rake and the enemies of the Malazan Empire so that they can work together to resolve this shared threat. And yeah, I think the politics in this, at least what we learn, was very interesting, and I'm excited to pick that up in the next book. So yeah, that does bring me to the end of this video. I don't know how long this is going to be. I might have to edit some stuff out as I go because I feel like I've rambled quite a bit, but thank you for watching this video. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts on Deadhouse Gates. I know that for some people this is their favourite book in the series, so if it is your favourite then please let me know why. I've also tried to set up my camera so you can hopefully see the Malazan art. I don't know where my finger is pointing, but hopefully you can see that in the background. My boyfriend put this up a few weeks ago now. I'll try and remember to insert some close-up footage so you can see, but this is artwork by Mark Simonetti and it is beautiful in my opinion. As I've already said, this is one of my partner's favourite series, and now that I am reading it as well, it feels good to have some artwork up in our library room. That's all from me though, so thank you for watching, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Click subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me, but otherwise I will see you next time. Bye!